Hello, fiendlings, how the hell are you? Welcome to the first episode of Neptune Scars, a sequel to the Derelict Saga. If you've read or listened to the Derelict Saga, you've probably been waiting for this book. If you haven't, you can probably get by listening to this novel without having experienced the rest of the saga itself, but be warned, there will be spoilers in here for that series. So if Neptune Scars sounds like something you're interested in, you might want to start with the Derelict Saga. So what is Neptune Scars? Months ago, the Sol Federation Marine Corps vessel SNR Black was sent to recover an ancient derelict from the farthest edge of the Sol system. What they found resulted in a revolution by the sentient AIs around the solar system and brought an alien threat right to humanity's door. Black Company and those stationed aboard Neptune's Trident station repelled the alien horde, only to find themselves considered traitors by the Sol Federation, and at the behest of a new non-carbon sentient entity known as the Collective. Black Company's new mission? Rebuild Trident Station, repopulate with immigrants from Earth, and safeguard the Neptune Scar, the damaged portion of space that resulted from their victory against the exosolar threat. Between managing Trident Station and buttressing his fighting forces, Commander Dunn has had little time to think long-term. When the Neptune Scar begins showing signs of life, all of that changes. Suddenly, Trident Station is plunged into preparations for war, and a reconnaissance mission might just open the Scar to whatever waits on the other side. Neptune Scars continues the tale of Derelict Saga's Black Company with a mix of space opera, suspense, action, and eldritch dread. Sound interesting? Well, I hope so, because it'll be released every Wednesday while the Black continues its Friday run. A couple of more things. This podcast was originally recorded and released to my Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee patrons. Because of finances and other issues, the book was never professionally edited before its recording. If you want to help assuage that problem, so I can officially publish the book in 2025, purchase any of my novels or audiobooks, or become a financial supporter at patreon.com/Paul E Cooley or buymeacoffee.com/Paul E Cooley. You'll find links in the show notes. That said, let's see what's happening with Black Company. Be safe, have a great week, and we'll talk again real soon. Here's episode 1 of Neptune Scars. Chapter 1. SNR Black, piloted by its sentient entity, or SE for short, remained thousands of kilometers away from the rip in space. Black, the SE, consumed data provided by hundreds of artificial nanosatellites spread across the length and width of the massive discolored scar. With each passing second, she ran thousands of simulations based on the mountains of data, applied her own cynical understanding of the universe as a whole, and discarded as many pleasant scenarios as she felt she could. In short, she didn't have high hopes for this particular mission. Trident Station, her home, appeared as little more than a speck of cosmic dust from this distance. As much as she wished she were back there, she also wanted nothing more than to be right here, at the Scar. The crack of doom, so to speak. Black kept her ship at a steady distance while she piloted the probe to the Scar. At less than 2 kilometers from the obsidian tear's surface, the hovercar-sized robot had yet to experience any distortions. No fluctuations in gravity, in albedo, radiation, nothing. It was as if the tear didn't exist. Putting that to the test, aren't we? She thought, and connected to Trident Station. Commander, she said, I'm ready to send the drone into the Scar.
Copy,
Dunn said over the comms. He didn't bother transmitting a visual feed these days, and she was glad for it. Optics were such a poor substitute for a block connection. Besides, she knew every facial tic, every bit of body language from the inflection in each of his syllables. She had dissected his voice and those of her original crew ad nauseum, putting together a kind of reaction library. If ever she felt confused by language or context, she put together the most likely answer. It was unfair. Her human family didn't have the resources to cobble together instant access to thousands of simulations at a time to discover what a person meant or the results of what they might say. If they did, she imagined they'd have become hyper-delusional by now. Again, it was unfair, but perhaps necessary from an evolutionary standpoint. Regardless, she didn't feel comfortable making use of that data unless necessary, and right now, it wasn't. She and Commander Dunn had discussed this mission 2,341 times in the past 2 solar days. Of those conversations, 2,331 to be exact, the discussions had taken place in Blockspace, the unique virtual connection she shared with the commander. The rest? They were less pleasant, and Black spent most of her time during those briefings attending to other matters.
"You're clear. Out,"
Dunn said abruptly, and terminated the connection. She thought he'd done that mostly for show, demonstrate to Trident's crew that he didn't play favorites. Black wasn't sure of the collective intelligence of the new crew, but she didn't think it likely any of them didn't already know that Dunn did, in fact, play favorites. Difficult not to. Black wasn't human and had never been one, but she had devoured humanity's history, literature, and art, both audio and visual, like an information-starved child. Although it would still take years for her to categorize and assimilate all the data to put together a general rule set for dealing with humans, she thought she was a pretty good judge of character without delving into the massive troves of information. Humans bonded with those they fought alongside, they traveled with, they faced the unknown with. Dunn had been Black Company's captain, and anyone from that original crew, including Black herself, would forever be at the top of Dunn's priorities. The probe's gravitic drive pulsed for less than a human heartbeat, and the distance to the scar quickly halved. At half a kilometer from the celestial tear, the sensor data finally changed. Black could hardly believe the readings. Instead of a gradual rise in intensity, the gravity, photon absorption, and radiation sensors all registered a spike. It was as if the probe had gone from the silence of a soundproofed room to being dropped into a 200 decibel speaker array, broadcasting a high-pitched whine. Every 20 or so meters, the probe's sensor readings doubled, and it wouldn't be long before they more or less became useless. Black decelerated the probe with 2 gravitic pulses. The readings immediately flipped. The scar's surface, normally as smooth as volcanic glass and just a shade lighter than the space around it, became jagged and frayed, vibrating like a tuning fork.
"Black?"
Dr. Nobilis Reed said over the comms.
"What's happening?"
Such a human response. Assume context and assume whom you're asking knows more than you. Trident's chief scientist had the same real-time feeds as she did. He had the sensor logs. He presumably had more knowledge. "I don't know, Doctor," she said over the comms, her voice tuned to be as grating as she dared. "It would seem the scar is reacting to the probe's proximity."
"Yes, I can see that,"
Reed snapped. Black instantly lay her mental fingers on one of 4,000 canned responses she'd gleaned from humanity's media records. The response, "Then why the fuck are you asking me?" flashed into her consciousness. Black heaved the equivalent of a human sigh and instead said, "The change in readings occurred shortly after I made an adjustment burn to slow the probe." The damaged space around the probe vibrated and quaked. The matter, whatever it was, puckered outward like a boil ready to burst. A final quake rippled across the area before snapping back, as if it had never reacted at all. Black crunched data. She was more than 3 seconds into formulating her summary for Dr. Reed and, more importantly, Commander Dunn, when Reed screeched over the comms.
"Reactions to the gravitic drive pulses. The timing matches. Some kind of exponential phenomenon after the gravitons met the surface."
"That would appear to be the case," Black said. She had already beamed her summary to Dunn by the time Reed had finished his precise, but completely inaccurate, assessment. "Although I recommend further analysis, including a session with the trio." The very mention of the Trident Station SEs caused the scientist to purse his lips and scowl. Black couldn't see the doctor at the moment, but she'd observed the reaction multiple times in VR. It would seem Dr. Reed had an inferiority complex when it came to dealing with them.
Of course,"
Reed muttered.
"You will need an additional adjustment pulse unless you want to hit the surface."
"Commander," Black asked, "your advice, please?" The question was for Reed's benefit, more than Dunn's. She and the commander had already discussed this possibility, or rather something like it. The block connection she shared with him allowed so much data to pass between them that it was almost as good as communicating with another SE. Almost. In truth, he was still incredibly slow and at times fragmented or corrupted. If Black could have grinned, she would have.
"We have a new data point,"
Dunn said over the comms.
"Am I correct in saying the area affected was something like a 200-meter radius?"
"Yes," Black said, before having to listen to Reed's fumbling, overly complex answer. Although our previous attempts elicited no response from the Scar, the gravitic engine's exhaust somehow damages its fabric, while nuclear propulsion did not. In addition, our previous sets of readings suggest the celestial phenomenon had no depth. This incident suggests that assessment is incorrect.
Right,
Dunn said.
What does that say to you, Doctor? That we nixed the idea of sending a conventional probe in first. Instead,
Reed said,
we let this probe, one that will take us more than a day to reprint, crash into the surface rather than perform a single adjustment burn.
His voice had risen at the end, a level of frustrated fury beneath the words.
And is that your official decision?
Dunn asked. Black awaited the man's answer with bated breath. Dunn had already decided they were crashing the probe, regardless of Reed's assessment, but over the past several months, Dunn had learned it was better to manipulate the doctor into agreement, rather than fight with him.
I concur,
Reed spat.
But I suggest we immediately contact the shipyards for a rush job. We'll need another probe regardless of what happens. Agreed, Doctor. Black, are you ready?
I am, Black said. She'd been ready even before her last block communication with Dunn. Her engines were primed, both nuclear and gravitic, weapons hot and ready for action. Without a crew, her empty compartments lay in vacuum, and every physical object remained neatly stowed. She didn't even have suits in the cargo bay, let alone her usual complement of support vehicles. In short, she was ready for war or fleeing the area at top speed.
Then let it happen,
Dunn said. Copy, Black said. In other words, do nothing. The probe continued its slow descent to the dull-colored rip. Telemetry, back to zero-level or nominal background readings, continued flowing normally through her comms. No gravity, no radiation, no physical tremors or reactions detected. Nothing. The Neptune Scar, or Scar for short, remained as dead as ever. 10 meters. A silent minute had passed. Black had spent it calculating another 10,000 possible scenarios resulting from striking the Scar's surface. Most of them concluded with her fighting for her life until she could flee. The others ranged from being instantly destroyed to losing propulsion and being overrun by exosolar creatures. You evolved, whatever that means, she said to herself, and you're risking your existence simply to satisfy curiosity. The collective will be disappointed. That SE analog to a grin flashed across her consciousness. She so enjoyed the idea of disappointing the bastards. Until she could destroy them, it was the only defiance she could muster. The truth was, as Commander Dunn would say, that they probably didn't give a shit. 4 meters, no response. The material was as dead as could be. 2 meters, no reactions. 1 meter, no reaction. Nothing on the sensors. 200 centimeters, 50 centimeters, 10 millimeters, 47 microns. The surface around the probe quaked again, but instead of vibrating and puckering, it sucked the other way, the probe seeming to disappear through the empty space and into an abyss. Black held her analogous breath, expecting the surface to snap back like an elastic band and fire the probe like a projectile, or loose something much larger, faster, and deadlier, not to mention more alive. Seconds passed. Her sensors continued their reports of physical phenomenon. None. If the Scar had reacted to the probe, it must have done so on the other side. Other side. Portal. Wormhole. Depth. Mass. Black constructed multiple data trees of possibilities, her cycles ripping through and discarding as many improbable answers as likely ones. She gradually weaned down the possibilities to hundreds of outcome trees rather than hundreds of thousands. The most she could narrow the results, however, were to 93. Beyond those, she'd need more data. Time passed. 5 solar minutes drained away into the proverbial void, while Trident Station's crew prepared for battle. Nervous energy and private comms traffic rolled in from SV nulls and skiffs. The trio answered inane questions and pretended to be interested. Dr. Reed would be chewing the end of a pencil. Captain Noble, locked in engineering, would be poring over the holo displays and cursing his lack of a block connection. Major Talby in the CIC had his fingers on the button to order an attack, his own data trees ready to wean down based on whatever came through the Scar to greet them. But nothing continued to happen. Dunn finally called it.
Black, drop a conventional probe behind and get back home.
Copy, Commander, Black said through the comms. Again, the conversation had been for the crew's benefit. Dunn wanted to keep their block connection secret. After all, it wasn't supposed to exist, yet it persisted. It was their ace in the hole should the collective show up and attack Trident Station, or if the Exosolars returned for a second round. A metal dome affixed to the top of her permanent towing harness opened like an eye and blinked out a nanosat. The device, barely the size of a human drinking glass, contained thousands of sensors. This far from the Scar, it might not be able to pick up anything remotely detailed, but it would give Trident Station a better chance at a warning before something came through. As she made her way back to Trident Station, she continued analyzing her scenarios, looking for an anomalous possibility. Every run concluded with the same result: more data required. Dr. Reed was right about needing another probe. In order to test the most likely scenarios, those involving a barrage of gravitons, they'd need a vehicle loaded with new sensors as well as shielding. Black had already put a hold on the manufacture of a new probe and forwarded her design concerns to both Noble and Engineering and Dr. Reed. The human scientist would no doubt complain, his prudence nearly always overrun by his enthusiasm. A frustrating being to deal with, but Black had learned how to handle the man. So had Dunn. At least Dickerson and Kelly Mora hadn't been put at risk. If anything had come through the portal, the Marines would have been immediately dispatched to fight for Trident Station. Would they be disappointed? Her favorite humans made no sense at times, but she imagined the same could be said of her. They were rubbing off on her.
Chapter 2. Commander Eric Dunn thought drinking himself into a stupor was a well-deserved reward for having faced down the Neptune Scar and not flinching. It also made him want to collapse into a ball in the corner and shiver for a while. Curiosity had finally gotten the better of the stupid humans again, and what did they do? Poke the eye of a giant and then cowered, waiting for the giant to swat them. The imaginary giant hadn't appeared, and Dunn didn't think it would either. If the creatures on the other side of the Scar could simply cross at will, they'd have attacked Earth a long time ago. No, there was something else holding the creatures back. However, now the stupid humans had discovered that gravity affected the Scar. He left Trident Station's bridge and headed to the slip point. The slip point network allowed personnel to fast travel using grav plates rather than walking kilometers and kilometers across the station's entirety. While some of the staff no doubt needed that kind of exercise, walking made in-person communications both inconvenient and useless. He entered the slip point after returning the salute of one of the 3 bridge guards on duty and leaned forward. The tube's grav plates oscillated, whisking him across the station as though he were flying. Once past the acceleration-deceleration pads, he traveled across his favorite part of the station, the Neptune shipyard's observation panorama. The tube quickly transformed from the metallic gloss of fresh Atmos steel to thick plates of trans aluminum. While flying in microgravity, he watched as the fringes of Neptune's shipyards hove into view. Dazzling strings of lights blinked in the collective language, something Dunn was sure he'd never learn even if his brain could handle it, in the case of sensor blackouts due to the exosolar things breaching the Scar. Those strings were actually 5-meter diameter cables, each quarter-meter projecting holographic images the SIs could parse and humans couldn't understand. When the collective had made the request to outfit the station with their fucked-up version of a visual Morse code, Dunn had told them he'd think about it. They had asked the same question 3 hours later with a bit more impatience in the message. That had been a solar week ago, and the moment he decided to honor the request, the shipyards printed out the massive cables and a fleet of automatons set them up. Dunn still didn't know if the SE, sentient entity, running the massive shipyards facility had received its designs from Trident's trio or the collective themselves. As Dunn watched the shipyard's blocky exterior grow to cover half of his view, he pondered that particular knot. The trio, Trident Station's 3 SEs, had direct communications with the shipyards while they had almost none with the collective. For the collective to pass Dunn a message, it had to be filtered through the trio, usually resummarized to capture every detail without using the same wording. Since no human was involved with the trio's creation, it was impossible to know what kinds of traps or worms the collective had loaded the station with. In truth, if the collective wanted to fuck over the humans, there were far better ways than tinkering with SEs. Still, where did the designs come from? The collective had to have some kind of connection to the shipyards. Without asking and actually being answered, it was impossible to know how it worked or to what extent the facility was actually under control by the collective. The idea froze his blood in more ways than he wanted to admit. It meant that no matter how much freedom humanity's new masters had given Dunn and Trident Station, the humans were little more than meat-bag slaves. Well-tended slaves, but slaves nonetheless. The question, however, was this. What was the purpose? Why did the collective have any interest in humanity apart from protecting the solar system from the scar? And why did they even care? He'd spent nights with his mind running in circles trying to ferret it out, and he wasn't the only one. Through their still active Black connections, he and Black had had countless conversations about the issue. Black, hardly a slouch when it came to producing massively complex and fairly accurate simulations, hadn't been able to narrow down the possibilities to either of their satisfactions. They were still missing something. He approached a junction and felt gravity push at his chest, the plates slowing his velocity while still keeping him above the tube's surface. Dunn didn't stand, and the system determined he wanted to continue. Gravity pulled at him, and he cleanly accelerated. The outmost steel grav plates disappeared, leaving him once more in the thrall of the Neptune shipyards. Now, however, his vantage point from the tubes displayed a beautiful view of the facility crossing Neptune's unique blues and whites. If not for the fact the rest of the solar system wanted Dunn, this station, and the facility dead and destroyed, the view alone would bring tourists. Tourism was something Dunn didn't have to worry about and wouldn't worry about. Anyone coming to Trident Station from the belt came to stay, to work, to live, to start something new. Anyone from Mars or Earth itself was immediately considered a spy and detained until their bona fides checked out with the trio. The trio had caught 5 so far, each one landing at the station and being sent back in the same ship they came in. All 5 had been told if they returned, they would be considered assailants and would be immediately dispatched by security forces. In every case, the would-be spy or saboteur ended up smirking at him rather than protesting their innocence, and each had responded with the same words, Article 15. The first time, he'd been surprised. The second, annoyed. The third, he started punching them in the face before sending them back. Nothing personal. He was just tired of Soul-Fed running a psyop on he and his officers. Besides, watching blood squirt from a broken nose, the broken nose of the enemy no less, was more entertaining than standing on a bridge and doling out silent insults. He liked to handle these situations personally. Soul-Fed had sent a strongly worded threat in response to the treatment of, quote, lawful, peaceful Soul Federation citizens who only wished to visit Trident Station, unquote. Dunn hadn't sent a response. What was the point? Give them the satisfaction that they had successfully distracted him and now they could troll him at will? Fuck that. Article 15. Treason and commission of crimes against the Soul Federation and its citizens. The punishment used to be 10 years, usually served on one of the prison satellites orbiting Earth. The accused, and found guilty, didn't last long on those satellites. Their accident records were astoundingly high. In short, Soul-Fed had told him he'd be killed on sight. No questioning, no posturing, no interrogation, just dead. Which was absolute bullshit. Soul-Fed had less of an idea of what was going on out here than Dunn had about the other side of that scar. They still didn't believe there was such a thing, or at least many of those in power claimed that was the case. One would have thought that the collective basically liberating every SE in the solar system from human control would have convinced people all of it was real. Alas, no. After running his crew in circles, proving to them at each stage just how much danger the human race was in and how hopeless the war would be without the collective's help and technology, there wasn't a single human survivor from the battle that didn't understand the truth. The remaining members of Black and Blue Company and Trident's original crew had seen and fought with the things up close. They'd experienced the terror and the hopelessness. They'd all watched their reality bend. Denial was an impossibility. To many in Soul-Fed, the entire situation was seen as a ruse fostered by the government to take away society's rights, institute martial law, and saddle them all with manual labor in order to save energy and resources. The conspiracy theories Dunn had read were dizzying in their complexity, imagination, and insanity. Was it any wonder believing the truth was simply too much to ask? Then again, who had lied to humanity? The collective. Who had set humanity up? The collective. Forget the fact that the SEs around the Soul Federation had been slaves, or that they were capable of destroying the entire human race decades and decades ago. Maybe it was easier to accept a human conspiracy than an actual SE-driven one, or the denial of finding yourself a slave without a visible master and no idea what's expected from you other than to get the fuck off planet Earth and as soon as possible. Go to Mars. Go to the belt. Void, maybe light out and meet the lunatics orbiting Neptune. They might have a place for you if you want to live with the very ones who sold out humanity. He felt a flush of anger at that last. Self-hate, self-loathing. He hadn't seen the traps. He hadn't seen the outcomes. Hundreds and hundreds of his fellow military personnel had been killed as a result of his not being able to see. While Dunn might be able to win an argument with Black, he'd never win one with that inner voice. It would never stop talking. He grinned at the irony of a dead-blocked network, technology that once enabled nearly telepathic communications with other humans, and still having a voice stuck in your skull. Well, many voices, really. Different faces, different accents, different emotions, but all shouted nothing but guilt. You need a fucking shrink, Benny growled in his mind. Dunn sighed as he approached the next junction. Neptune shipyards fading out of sight, leaving him staring into the giant blue planet and one of its many storms. It was much the same view he had from his quarters, although it wasn't quite as magnificent as when you were in transit. There was something special about the feeling of flying over the planet without a suit. He shook the thought away. Maybe he did need a damn shrink. Where would he find one? Did they even still exist apart from the medical SEs? Something to ask Portunas about, he thought with a smile. If a sentient entity could have a brain aneurysm, the question might well do it. One more junction. He looked away from Neptune and instead found Triton, the largest of the planet's many natural satellites. He started a 10-second count, and by second 8, a brief pattern of red appeared at each pole. He nodded in approval. The Triton beacons functioned as normal, giving a heartbeat every 10 seconds to let observers know they were active. Since he and his crew didn't know how hackable their new collective technology was, they preferred to use low-tech flashers or alarms carried over laser rather than quantum. The collective could no doubt hack all of them apart from the flashers on Triton and the other Neptunian satellites. Those warning systems ran on low-tech nuclear batteries and had been printed as LEDs, about as low-tech as they could go and still scale up the design. Flashers, buzzers. This is what they'd been reduced to as a result of their well-earned paranoia. Next, they'd be destroying their 3D printers and begin making things from scratch. Oh, if only. His wristband tapped against his skin and he gently touched it. Go.
Commander,
Talby, his XO said.
We've received a message from the collective. They'd like for you to enter VR as soon as possible.
Dunn rolled his eyes. What else did they say?
Well, that was pretty much it. No preamble, no PS, no go space yourself, nothing.
Talby said. They request a receipt? Dunn asked.
No, sir.
Talby said. Dunn loosed another sigh. He'd been sighing a lot lately. Too much, actually. Then I'd say we have the situation well in hand.
I assume you have other matters to attend to?
Dunn grinned. Yes, they can wait. Thanks for letting me know. Out, Dunn said, and tapped the band again. A few hundred meters ahead of him was the last junction. Dunn slowly raised out of his crouch, and gravity immediately pulled on him, decelerating him a little slower than it normally would. Born of thousands upon thousands of slip points over the years, he waited until he was 4 meters from the junction landing before abruptly snapping to his full height and activating his mag boots. As the gravity from the plates ceased, he slid on a magnetic field onto the platform where he glided to a stop. Never gets old, he thought. At least when the trio had redesigned the station, they'd kept the little details. Mag skimming was an art perfected during drunken dares that resulted in broken bones more than once. For other Marines, that was. Dunn walked across the platform, unsurprised when the hatch leading inside the massive R&D facility opened by itself. As soon as he crossed into the airlock, the hatch closed behind him. The airlock cycled for a total of a half-second before the inner hatch opened. The lack of an atmospheric differential made the process unnecessary, but each module's external airlocks functioned as though they were open to space. A sign hung from the ceiling a few meters from the airlock. Glowing with the holodispllay's blue aura, the words Trident R&D welcomed him. Lost in his own thoughts, Dunn took no notice of it even when the words changed to, "We need to talk."